my name is Elise McKimmey, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Feature Film Program, and very happy today to be reunited with 4 of the directing fellows that participated in the 2020 Directors Lab, which was the first iteration of the lab to take place completely online using our Collab platform. And so I'm going to ask each one of them to briefly introduce themselves to start off our conversation, and would love for each of you to tell us a bit about yourself, your name, where you're from, where you are in the world right now, a little bit about your background, and also the name of your project, and just a couple of sentences about what the story is about. So Jesus, let's start with you.
Jesus Celaya. I'm originally from Washington State in northern Mexico, and my project is Chalino, which is the kind of hyper-real musical biopic of Chalino Sanchez, the Mexican musician who originated the narco corrido, which is a sort of lyrical ballad that talks about the lives of Mexican outlaws.
Great. Laura?
I'm Laura. I was born in New York City. I live in New York City. I guess before I was a working director and screenwriter, I have volunteered as an EMT, worked as a Christmas elf seasonally. I was a production assistant, and then kind of worked my way up through the art department to be a production designer. And my project is called Birth Rebirth, and it is a modern retelling of the Frankenstein story from my perspective.
Great. Let's go to Bing.
Hi, my name is Bing Liu. I was immigrated from China when I was a boy and mostly grew up in the Midwest. A little bit about me, I started toying around with cameras as a teenager when I was filming skate videos, went to school to teach English, and then worked my way up the camera department for most of my career in film. My project that I brought to the labs is called Chinks. It's about this 16-year-old Chinese-American boy armed with a camera as he navigates this abusive household that he's trying to survive, along with his half-brother and mother.
Great, thank you. And Nikiatu.
So, Nikiatu Jusu. I am originally born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, first-gen American to Sierra Leonean parents. And I'm currently based between Maryland and New York. I don't know what to say about my background. I'm a Libra. My film is called Nanny, and it's about an undocumented nanny caring for a privileged child in the Upper East Side as she prepares for the arrival of her child that she left behind in her native country. As she's preparing for this American dream, a violent haunting invades her reality, which jeopardizes the life that she's creating in New York. So it's a supernatural horror / psychological thriller. I'm still figuring out. It's very much cross genre. And this is what brought me to the lab.
Fantastic. So I would love to hear each of you just talk a little bit about how you found your way to storytelling, to filmmaking, sort of what was the inspiration for you to come to this, and also thinking about either, what sort of things, whether it's other pieces of art or people or your own intention, inspire you kind of an ongoing basis to keep at it. If there are particular types of stories or characters or themes that you're drawn to in your work, just to get a sense of why you do this and why you want to keep doing it. I don't know if anyone wants to start and jump in, or I can call on people.
So I stumbled into filmmaking. I went to undergrad for engineering, and I stumbled into a screenwriting course at Duke University where I went to undergrad. And I guess my entry point into filmmaking is through writing. And I figured out that I could translate that into motion picture, and I instantly fell in love with the craft of filmmaking. because it didn't die on the page. It could live on the screen. And nobody in my life was even remotely in the film industry or was a filmmaker. But my mother wrote a novel that she self-published called So Pretty and African. And so I grew up in a house where I was reading and writing a lot and saw an example of an artist who created her own path. And so in terms of the stories that I gravitate to, I think I live at the intersection of social resonance and genre. I definitely I aim to make films that are timely and have something poignant to say, but also that are entertaining. And so specifically, I love to explore unhinged women protagonists, especially Black women characters with nuance and edge. Yeah.
Great. Laura, I see you nodding along a lot. Do you want to jump in?
Unhinged women, you know, all about it. No, I related to a lot of what Nikiatu said, but yeah, my background, I found it late, filmmaking. I came from a pretty musical household. Everybody played music. And I went to LaGuardia High School, which is a music and art high school in New York City. I think that was pretty key, like going to a school that specialized in the arts pretty young, because the possibility of it as a profession and not like rock star, nobody, you know, famous actor, nobody, you know, it was discussed like in tangible terms when I was pretty young. So I thought I was going to be a percussionist. I did not like being alone in a room for that long practicing. So I ended up studying theater in college, which was more collaborative, but that didn't feel quite right. Then became completely disillusioned with the arts and became an EMT. And then, you know, came back to film through as a production assistant. So I sort of felt really lost in my 20s. I felt like I just collected all these jack of all trades, master of none things. And it wasn't until I sort of accidentally stumbled into directing my first short that I was like, oh, all of these things are filmmaking skills. Like every skill that I've been building my whole life actually combines, like a video game. I've been picking up these different skills and now I get to use them as a filmmaker. So that's, yeah. And production, like, you know, we all, I think, probably love different parts of filmmaking more and love different parts less, but I love being on set. That's kind of where I live, which is a bummer right now.
Right. Yeah. Jesus, what about you? Did you also have sort of art or storytelling or something like that in your life from a young age, or is it something that you found on your own?
I actually can't remember a time before like knowing that movies was what I wanted to do. In fact, I was home recently a couple of weeks ago and I was asking my mom, like, do you ever remember me saying anything else? She's like, oh no, you used to just say movie maker, that's all I wanted to do. You know, so that sadly there's no sort of origin story there. It was just there, and I always had you know, a video camera as soon as we could afford one. And I take that back, actually. My mother did say that for a time I wanted to be a priest, so I don't know how that connects psychologically, but that was there. So yeah, you know, as soon as I could get my hands on a camera, I started making films with my cousins and with my sisters and telling them what to say. I think I started figuring out I wanted to be a director, like when we were playing with our Jurassic Park toys, me and my cousins. And then I remember once my cousin just threw his toys to the ground and was like, I'm not playing anymore. And I'm like, why? He's like, because you keep telling me what to say with my toy. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry.
And a director was born.
I saw the making of featurettes. I'm like, oh, I'm that guy. That's what I do. Yeah, and in terms of inspiration, of course, other films, just anything to do with story, literature, comic books, even music to me is very story driven. All the way down to just a really, really good conversation with someone who's lived a lot, telling me about how something happened or this moment, you know, all of that just mixes in and I take from.
Mhm. Do you remember what your favorite movie was as a kid, or you like that first movie that you went back to again and again?
Yeah, yeah, actually, it was. I was raised on old Hollywood, the old VHSs of the old Hollywood stuff. So Errol Flynn in Robin Hood
Awesome.
every day.
Love it. Nice. And Bing, what about you? How did you find your way to this?
Yeah, I got a camera when I was 14 just to film skateboarding. But, in the skateboarding community, there's a lot of artists there, in the DIY sort of warehouse sort of variety. And so, like painting, drawing, writing, like it was all sort of just in the midst of people I hung out with. And so we dorked around and made things sometimes. And yeah, and then I went to school to teach English because I was just really taken by a lot of teachers who taught English in high school and middle school who just, kind of became quasi mentors for me. So yeah, I kind of wanted to become one of those people for other youngsters. Um, yeah, and then I sort of fell into production work and thought I was going to become like work my way up the camera department someday. But I just kept doing my own little things on the side, and um, you know, in terms of inspiration, I mean, yeah, I guess just like watching movies and television shows that really reflect the communities that feel very familiar. Uh, like growing up, there's the film Slacker about like the Austin community. Like it really touched me. Like it just felt very, much like my community. And even like recently, just rewatching Atlanta, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, it's just like this portrait of a community that feels very familiar. So, yeah.
Right. And obviously, when you're, as you said, you got your start filming the skate videos and then you made your documentary, Minding the Gap. And I'm just curious, when you would get started by making these skate videos, were those videos kind of exclusively about showing off the skating? Did you ever try and build or even think about bringing a narrative arc to those? And, has that kind of affected your thinking as now you're moving into fiction storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the skateboarders that I knew, like we used them in little short films and music videos. I also started putting like skits inside of skate videos as a teenager, and yeah, it was just all in the vein of experimentation. Like it was just fun to sort of play around.
And your friends were willing to go along with you most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, it was less like, play, but sometimes it just felt like, like, I guess art and like DIY sort of art. And I think everyone, a lot of times took it seriously, but yeah, oftentimes it was just, let's just try this, and because it'll be fun. So.
Great. So now I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit more specifically about the project that you're developing now that you brought to the lab, and just hear from you guys, what was the spark for you to come up with the idea for this story? What's your personal connection to it? Why does it feel urgent to you right now? Why is this the story that you have to tell right now? Jesus, let's go to you for this one to start.
This project was brought to me by Storyboard Entertainment, and my initial emotional reaction was no, but it was kind of like a strong one, and that was weird to me. So I kind of just examined it over the next few days before they called back. Then realized the reason that I was saying no was because it was so close to certain things that I'd seen or experienced or was angry about with my particular area in Mexico and where my family comes from. With cartel presence and changes culturally there. That this played a huge part in that, and I like had like a kind of a little bit of a fear of like talking about that stuff, or maybe a fear of what I was going to say. So yeah, as soon as I felt that, I kind of knew that it was the right direction to go. and I just started out as the writer, and you know, just like every deep relationship I've been in, I'm like, oh well, I'm just gonna do this, and you know, I'll just write it, and then I'll leave it be. But then as pages started coming through, and moments and scenes, and I just started really getting connected into this story. I mean, to the point where by the time the Screenwriters Lab was coming up, I just knew I kind of had to find a way to put myself in that seat and direct this as a first-time director, to which Sundance helped me greatly to get to that position. So that was it, and now I just can't see a place where I don't make this film, you know, and it's been a strange journey. And in terms of why this story now is just that, you know, the violence in Mexico is at an all-time high, and a lot of it has to do with narco culture and its relationship to the existing culture before. And you know, that's really, I think, what this movie is kind of about. It's about the absolute stark beauty of Mexico, at odds with this violence, creative violence, albeit, but violence nonetheless, that is being born out of that same soil.
Yeah. And when you talk about how you were sort of more drawn in and felt more personally connected to it, is it, I mean, I'm sure it's multiple things, but do you feel like it's more about your opportunity to express your connection to a cultural community? Do you feel like it's the music? Do you feel like it's this particular guy? I know also you've talked a little bit about kind of, again, the origin story of a storyteller, because Chelino is a very powerful storyteller. What specifically is the thing that really kind of emotionally resonated with you?
Well, I gotta admit, to at first, like with Chelino, there was like this great distance between me and him when I was writing it. Like I really didn't see myself in that guy. Again, because of my notions about this music, about this subculture and what it represented. And then, man, just as I started writing it, it's so funny that I've often heard films called empathy machines, and it really was a that kind of experience of like really seeing yourself in the mind and body of someone that you felt was so distant to you, and you kind of seeing correlations as you did research of like, oh shit, I do relate to that. I relate to that moment or that choice, or that aspect of him. And yeah, that was more really what started connecting for me to where I couldn't let it go.
Great, thank you. Nikiari, what about you? Can you talk about how Nanny began for you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned previously, I'm first-gen American, born to Sierra Leonean parents in Atlanta, Georgia. So I had a very unique microcosm growing up in the South, but also being very ingratiated in the African community here in the South. And I haven't really seen the Black immigrant experience depicted in America on screen that much. I mean, it's been done before, but I it's a very unique experience. And then I went to NYU, I got to New York, and I saw these Black and brown nannies pushing mostly white children in strollers. And it was kind of the crystallization, like the visual crystallization of something I've been thinking about for a long time, which is, the women in my life, including my mother, who had done so much domestic work, coming to America with a very tangible dream and really specific skill sets and abilities and being brilliant, but having to be in the periphery of other people's lives. And the American dream is really essentially a nightmare for so many people, as we're seeing now, with contemporary issues. And so I felt like grounding a nanny story, an African nanny specifically, a Black nanny specifically story, in that horror of the American dream in a city like New York, where we have some of the most prevalent demographic of Africans in the United States are in New York City. And grounding that in a city like that on the surface looks like a melting pot, but is very much segregated and isolating and inequitable. And so those are the various variables that brought this story to become something tangible. And I didn't want to do a straightforward drama. I definitely wanted to ground it in genre. Yeah. So that was like the beginning of the nanny process, which I started writing approximately 7-ish years ago.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. That's great. Laura, what about you? How did you get inspired to sort of reimagine the Frankenstein story in this way?
Well, it's funny because I feel like, you know, we've been asked this question at Sundance periodically over the course of the last 6 months. And it's so fun to hear everyone's answers evolve and like become more rooted in truth or their truth. And now I'm very intimidated, but I'll try. I have been thinking about this for over 20 years. When I was 12 and like hitting puberty, I feel like I was handed a stack of books written by Austens and Brontes that I couldn't relate to, that were putting me in like a box about being a woman. You know, that it was books full of women talking about marriage and how to get married and who to marry, and I hated it. And Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was the first book I read by a woman that I could relate to. And I related to it really deeply. I felt like, oh yeah, I'm that guy, you know, Victor Frankenstein, who wants to conquer death, because I had this paralyzing fear of death growing up, that adults wouldn't talk about. Horror talks about it. And I also feel really connected to that genre for that reason. And so, yeah, so then this lay dormant, this idea in my mind for a really long time, and then kind of resurrected itself around the time that I hit in my life where I was asking myself a lot of questions about reproduction. If I wanted to have children with my body, what that was going to look like, what that was going to do to me, what that was going to do to my career. So it's interesting because it really began at puberty and has like, and it didn't come out until now. And I'm only now realizing why.
And how old were you when you read Frankenstein? Do you remember?
12. My parents were really cool. I mean, they were cool because I like to read, and they were, and I like to read Stephen King and horror, I mean, from a really young age. And my mother was very cool. She was like, she's reading. She could read whatever she wants, but I was gravitating towards stuff that was a little, maybe not age appropriate for most parents.
All right, well, it all worked out for you.
Yeah. My mother would say, oh, that's very interesting. She's like, your work is so interesting.
That's the good catch-all word. And Bing, so talk a little bit about you starting to tell this story, and particularly, you know, the birth of this story in the fiction feature format.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I made this documentary where I put a little bit of my family story in there, where I interviewed my brother and my mom. And on the film festival circuit, just so many people asked me about what my story is and wanted to know more about me and my family and our journey. And so, you know, I was like, okay, let me look into it. And it's, you know, mostly it's just a really, you know, in a story sense, it's just a really dramatic story. You know, my mom married this man who was really abusive, but it also gave us our citizenship. She wanted to leave, but she also had a child with him. She did leave for a little bit, and then, you know, she got back together with him. And then all the while, I was sort of, you know, becoming a little, you know, quasi baby filmmaker with the camera. And so a lot of it is just piecing together so much of the puzzle that I feel like my adolescence was. And, you know, again, I haven't really seen the story that like this represented before. So.
And can you talk a little bit about your process for sort of figuring out how much of yourself do you actually want to put in this film? How do you think about, you know, creating characters that are at least based on or inspired by real people that are obviously very, very close to you, versus the idea of a fiction film being able to tell the truth without necessarily just stating the facts in the same way that you would in a documentary. How do you wrestle with that, and how much of that are things that you can address through kind of craft-based lessons and tools versus kind of the emotional decision-making process that you go through?
Well, in a weird way, I'm like forced to, because I don't really remember that much, which is partly why I'm doing the film. I just remember the situation and little bits and pieces of why people did things, but I don't remember how they did it, so it forces me to go back to that place. And, I don't know, maybe subconsciously I am drawing from, the truth of what actually happened, but mostly I have to get into the head of every single character, even if it's uncomfortable, and just sort of find a way that's relatable for like why they're doing what they're doing and how they're doing it. So.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, all of you, even though your stories are not explicitly autobiographical, we've just heard how deeply personal they are to each of you. And I sort of be curious to hear each of you speak to the struggle, both of writing a character that feels very much aligned with your own experience, and then also how you think about characters who maybe feel further from you or are the antagonist to the character that you feel is in some way a surrogate for yourself. Does anyone want to jump in on that? All right, Nikiata, you have at it.
I need to stop smiling when you ask questions. Please. Like, yes, I have the answer, but I don't. No, I think I thought about this question, and I think I've been forced to be very hyper aware of self. In a lot of the spaces that I maneuver, I'm often one of the only Black people, one of the only Black women, if not the only one. And so, seeing cinema, so much of cinema, being conditioned growing up to see so much of cinema through a white gaze, I think I've thought deeply about putting narratives that I want to see on the screen. And so I'm pulling from mythology that we haven't seen that much, West African mythology. I could be even more specific, but I keep it general because it's just so foreign to people. I'm pulling from things that I want to see more of. Toni Morrison, the writer, talks a lot about, and Octavia Butler, the people I admire, talk a lot about creating the stories that you want to see. And so because I'm pulling from this oasis of content that hasn't been poked or prodded in a substantial way, I think it makes it a lot easier for me to just run with the most fundamental aspect of all of that, because it just hasn't been explored in depth. But it also gives me a scapegoat in terms of not thinking as deeply as I should, because there are people who will be watching this who come from these places and who understand this mythos better than I do. And so, yeah, I think I try to be authentic, and I try to be very self-aware. And I think I have the luxury right now of being a unique, singular voice in this landscape.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've often heard many writers, several of our advisors, talk about how you have to eventually, as you're developing a project and going through the many drafts, think about each character as the hero of his or her own movie. And even though they may not be the hero of your movie, you have to think about if they walked off the pages in your script and into, their own story, they have to be as fully fleshed out in terms of their fears and their wants and all of that. But I should imagine that there are often characters that you feel an affinity towards and are the ones that you are drawn to and the ones that you want to write. And so I'm always really fascinated with how as you use the term film as empathy machine, but in a way I feel like as writer directors, you also have to have that capacity to empathize even with the characters who are not likable or who are behaving badly, because they do have their own needs, emotional needs that are driving them, even if they're doing terrible, terrible things. Laura?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I agree, but I think you don't have to do that first when you're writing. Right. You know, I think that a lot of times when you're experiencing oppression in some way, or when I am, and I'm writing from the perspective of a character who feels oppressed or is oppressed in the way that I feel oppressed, I get very angry when people are like, but just consider the other person's perspective when I'm being asked to do that too early. You know, like, I think that that's work that has to be done. I totally agree. But it can be hard in spaces where people that you feel don't fully understand your work are asking you to empathize with the villain of your film, you know, and you know, I mean, I've read everybody's work, but I'm thinking about Nikiatu's work in particular. You know, she's bravely wrestling with that. I chickened out of it. I feel like in my work, I'm so angry. I'm so finished with hearing about men's opinions about women's bodies that I was like, I'm just gonna write a movie with we don't have them. I'm gonna write a reverse Bechdel film where there's like two men and they don't really have names and they don't matter. And so I chose in this work, particularly to just kind of like not even engage with those perspectives, you know, because it was too painful.
Mm-hmm. But I also think in your work in particular, even if those men aren't present on the screen or in dialogue, they're very present. And yeah. The women's previous experience and expectation of what comes from those men is still an impacting element to the lives that they live and the choices that they make.
Absolutely.
Jesus, what about you? I mean, obviously you've talked about how you felt more and more connected to a character that initially you kind of felt very distant from. And this is also a real character who many people in the world have a deep connection to, and yet there's not a tremendous amount of factual information about him and his story to necessarily access. So what's the balance between your own connection to him, research you might be able to do, and the time when you need to sort of set the idea of research or almost documenting someone aside and let the story sort of dictate where it goes?
I mean, I think setting all of that aside kind of happened even during the research process, if that makes any sense. Because I realized, like, every time anybody spoke of Chileno, it wasn't Chileno, it was who he meant to them or their perspective of him. So I realized I can't just pick one of theirs, I'll have to just do my own. So that's essentially what comes out. Every writer here can attest to the fact that no matter what, a little piece of you goes with each character, you know? And that's kind of what it goes into. And character is such a funny thing, because it sort of gets complicated after the fact when I think about it. But like, I mean, in the moment, you know, I mean, when I was just putting words on the page, I'm just an anarchic Mexican writing about anarchic Mexicans, and it just came right out. It was pretty easy the first go around, and I didn't really have to think about them too much in terms of their relationship to each other, because they were just existing. And that's the best. You know, ask me on another project though, I'm sure it would be much more difficult. But yeah, with this one, it definitely was that distance with them at the beginning, and then you know, that old adage of there but for the grace of God go I. You know, you just continue that and try to see that, and then put words to it.
Great, thank you. So I want to go back to, a few of you have raised the idea of quote unquote genre films, and you know, almost all of your projects embrace and blend different genres. You know, Nikiatu, as you said, your film sort of lives at the intersection of psychological horror and social resonance, and Birth Rebirth is a reimagination of the Frankenstein myth through a female lens, and Chinks is in some ways has many elements of a classic sort of coming of age and identity quest, and then Chileno has biopic, it's a musical, it's a Western, it's kind of got everything. And I'm just curious for each of you how you think about genre in your work, particularly when you're originating a project? And do you set out to write in a specific genre, or does the story tell you what it wants to be? Laura, maybe you can start.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a great question to like narrow it down to, you know, at the beginning of a piece. And I would say no, I don't. And I would say that's why I haven't had the opportunity to make a feature yet. You know, that I really do try to let the story reveal itself, and then I find myself in a frustrating position from an industry perspective, because I make a movie that, you know, goes to Blumhouse, or I write a script that goes to Blumhouse, and they say, where are the jump scares? And I go, yeah, there aren't going to be any. And then I go to, you know, what's Reese Witherspoon's company, and they're like, this is too dark, you know. and I feel like, you know, pretty much stuck. You know, I think, you know, my films, I think people who find catharsis in horror like my films. I don't think they're horror films. And so they won't be for everyone. There are definitely gonna be people who'd be traumatized by this film, and they shouldn't see it. And I hope I can cut a trailer that will warn them away from it sufficiently so as not to hurt them. But I also don't know that, you know, so, and I do, yeah, that's, genre is messy. And, or I think great genre films are messy. Horror, and I'm using, you know, I'm messing up. I'm using the term genre to mean horror, which it doesn't. But I guess it does to me, because I take all the meetings about it. You know, I hate these boxes personally, but I understand we also use these boxes to find the content that we relate to. So I look for horror films, and that word is helpful to me. So, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with you that sort of genre has become almost a coded word, sometimes for horror, but also just for anything that's not a drama. And I also think that, you know, the interesting thing about all of your films are that you are embracing elements of the specific genres that you're playing in, but there are also times when you are reinventing them or subverting them or transcending them. And I'm curious to know if the ways in which you do that feel very sort of intentional and planned to you, or if it's something that you discover in the creation process. Nikiatu, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I wanted to, Laura said everything I was thinking and that I'm maneuvering, which is, it's such a fine line when you have, like, it's champagne problems to some people, right? You have an agent at a quote unquote top tier agency, and then you're maneuvering the indie scene simultaneously and getting grants. But you have a lot of voices in your ear about what your film should be. And genre in America is very clear cut in terms of, this is a horror, this is a thriller, this is an action film. And when most of your influences, like most of my influences are foreign grounded horror, A Tale of Two Sisters, Korean, Amoris Perros is not horror, but it's like cross genre. You have Funny Games, Michael Haneke, that's like an invasion movie, a home invasion movie. But when your influences are international but you're being very cemented in an American system, it's easy to feel like, yes, every 10 pages you need a jump scare. It's a very formulaic. And I'm finding that I originated with the story, I originated with the character, and I'm being taken on this ride where I have to figure out what elements of American cinema am I willing to succumb to get this film made, versus holding on to my creative vision that is very much internationally influenced. And I think there's a happy medium you can strike. I think one of the biggest complaints I got in the industry, which was a different complaint from what I got in the incubation of Sundance, was that we are not feeling the genre in the first 3 pages, you know? And I think international cinema gives you the luxury of building these characters and building this world and getting us into the world first before we have these tropes. And so you constantly find yourself meeting people halfway, but trying to stay true to your vision in order to get the thing made.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like for you, when you were writing this script, were you working more intuitively to start, or were you trying to at least use the idea of sort of classical structure, whether it's 3 acts or inciting incident or where you wanted it to climax, as a guidepost to start laying it out and then sort of go back and be like, okay, now how do I feel about this?
I think it was a mix of both. It was just a messy process. I think I wrote a lot, like did a lot of vomit drafts just to start getting, characters and who they are out and situations especially. Yeah, and then I would like go back and sort of start shaping it with, these storytelling mechanics, the math of it. And then it would just feel really mathematical and like it just didn't feel real. And then I'd have to go back and I don't know, with this one, it's just like felt like so many, not just rewrites, but just page one, like reimaginings. I think like the draft I submitted from the Screenwriters Lab to the Directors Lab was just almost a completely different story. I felt like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's messy when it's this personal, I think. It's hard to get perspective.
Sure. And Jesus, do you have any sort of patterns or formulas or templates you use when you're approaching a rewrite? I think that's a question that a lot of newer writers often ask is, does every rewrite have to be page 1 to page 110? How do you know when you do need to sort of start over versus doing something that's a little bit more strategic or focused or targeted?
A page 1 rewrite to me sounds like the apocalypse. Like I feel like I've never had to do it. I don't know. I just have this kind of weird naive faith that like the first time that I do it, there's something pure and worth preserving there. That it is more like just it's going to be a lot more work, but the work that I need to do is to get back to that. So I'm not sure I ever redirect. I've never had to redirect so big, But then again, maybe in terms of the work that I've been doing, I haven't really gotten to that point yet. But yeah, I definitely just see it as architecture and almost have to like physically imagine something there that I'm like chipping away at. I think sculpting is the closest thing that I can think to. But yeah, that's really it. There isn't that much of a step-by-step structure that I take to it. I just imagine it that way and then start chipping away and time passes. But I was actually greatly interested in your genre question because Cellino sort of has no genre. And it's interesting to be in this business at a time because I realize I mix genres. I mix a little bit of Western, a little bit of horror, a little bit of the supernatural, and it's almost like and I realized it's because I myself am a mixture as well, a mixture of culture, a mixture of bloodline, a mixture, all these things are in me like that, and so it's just entirely natural for me to take something that people say is separate and over here and then put it together. And then you're existing within the studio structure and the Hollywood system that kind of tells you that the mixture is not okay. That it muddles it. It makes it nobody's gonna want that. But I'm just damn determined to make that a lie.
Good for you. No, I think that's always the catch-22, right? Is that people say they want to see the thing that no one's ever seen before, and then they're also saying like, well, you can't do that, that's never been done before, that's not how it's done.
They're always following and not leading. I mean, I think that's been true of my experience in Hollywood. They're following, they're saying this person, this actor was bankable last year, so they're bankable now. And then when that when you've got an actor that breaks out because of your film, I mean, it hasn't happened to me, but I've seen it happen to others, then they say, well, we took meetings with her 2 years ago. She's a real up and comer. It's like they don't help anyone get there, and then they just sort of look back. I'm processing a lot of feelings post lab of like intense anger at the industry. So, you know, but it's impossible. And I'm with Nikiatu. I just wish that I was European so often. I'm like, I wish there was funding that didn't force me to constantly defend my vision, like against infiltration. It's exhausting.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. But I think that also that's sort of, you know, even though it's such a slog and a hard road, that's the opportunity afforded to all of you as independent filmmakers, is that, you know, you go out and you're saying, you know, if you don't believe it when I tell you, so I'm going to show you, I'm going to create it myself. And that is, you know, that manifestation is incredibly powerful. So now I want to talk a little bit about the lab. You know, obviously it affords every fellow an opportunity to do a really deep dive into your own work and examine it on a very sort of fundamental level, but also the lab is about community and sharing and learning from each other. And I'm just curious if there's any specific lesson or takeaway or just a moment that sparked for you after hearing one of the, you know, your fellow fellows or even advisor talk about their own work or their own process. You know, one thing that specifically stood out to me when I was just sort of thinking about this conversation that we were going to have was the moment when Karin Kusama was talking about her work, and she talked about how she does the seeing and feeling read, and how to sort of maintain perspective on something that you've worked on for so long to know if it's actually working. And she said, you know, if you don't feel anything when you're doing that, that's a red flag for you, but it's not necessarily a problem. It's like a fever. It just tells you that there's something up. And that was something that really resonated with me. So I'm just curious if there's anything that reminds you of either from an advisor or another fellow that sort of stood out to you. Does anyone want to jump in? Or is the answer no?
No, I mean, I
I'll
don't,
jump in.
I'm much more comfortable being called on. Yeah, please,
Yeah.
Nikiatu. I'm more comfortable.
No, I mean,
Okay.
Elise alluded to what I wanted to mention, which was Karin Kusama and Casey Lemons both echoed each other without realizing this idea of there are certain moments where you want the hairs to stand up on the back of your neck as the creator, and you're combing through your own work and that's not happening for you. How do you expect that to happen for the audience? And constantly challenging yourself to be honest in every moment and not just meeting these plot points. That was really pivotal for me, just reaffirming that how much both Corin, Elena Suarez, like all the advisors had to go through to get even one tangible vision, one film that feels like them, before they're sucked into this industry that, you know, where all these voices and all these hands are in the pot. Casey Lemon said, I had a vision and I wasn't going to leave until I at least tried to get it. And that stuck with me because there are so many variables once you do get on set. And now with everything happening, when are we going to get on set? How thankful are we going to be? How much are we going to lose sight of our vision once we do get on set that we were steadfast in prior to getting on set? You know, you have to hold on to those things once you're on set, even when people are tired, even when the budget has been bumped down from 3 mil to God forbid 1 mil. You just have to hold on to those things, and that's one of the big things I got from these filmmakers.
Right. Bing, anything for you?
Miguel Arteta told me in our one-on-one about the goiter scene. That's what he called it. You know, basically he's trying to get me out of this like box that he felt like I was putting my story in, where it was just like very sort of, I was trying to make it very drum tight. And he was like, you know, look, every project I do, and a lot of directors do this, they just look for moments where there's some downtime. You take the camera and a couple actors and you just sort of like, you know, have them talk about milk and cookies, or like have them watch this game show and like just, you know, be themselves and their characters. And so, you know, it just made me think about how, yeah, we do all this work to prepare and we fight for like what it is that we, want our vision to be, but this is an organic process, and we just sometimes we have to let it breathe, and it can be really magical.
Laura?
So many things, but I guess kind of, yeah, Erin Cressida Wilson was one of my screenwriting advisors during the labs, and she had my writing partner and myself write a list of 5 questions we didn't know the answers to about our movie. And we did. And then she made us, in one paragraph, without too much judgment or thought, like switch papers and answer each other's questions. And it was huge. And it was a really excellent exercise. And I think you could probably do it solo as well. Just answer your own questions. But even when the answer is, I don't know yet, then it sort of reveals to you the work that needs to be done. It was so helpful because I feel like we are in the later stage of the script writing. Like, we came out of the labs without feeling like we needed to fundamentally change the structure of our movie, but we came out feeling like we needed to deepen the characters' relationships to each other and like get what we knew about them out on the page. And so that exercise, I feel like, so many tangible tools for when you're stuck. I think, filmmaking feels so mystical, and I have really appreciated like thinking of it like carpentry, especially writing. Like you can learn how to build a staircase. And I feel like when you're stuck as a screenwriter, like writer's block can be so intimidating and so scary and like paralyzing. So it's like, all right, you have writer's block, tough shit, free write for 30 seconds, like basically, just tools to get you unstuck. So there were so many of them, but that was a big one for us.
I'm just curious, were you surprised by the questions that your co-writer had?
Yes, I was, and he was surprised by mine. And we ended up, but when we answered each other's questions, almost now this does feel mystical. Like we did end up with the same answers, not having similar answers or compatible answers, not having discussed what we knew privately about these characters. We've just been living with it for so long. So that's cool. That's when you feel like, okay, I'm getting to the end, because these people are so real that Brandon, my co-writer, and we can both know them independently.
Yeah. No, that's always the key, right? Is getting the stuff that you know of here on the page.
Down there.
Yeah. And Jesus, what about you?
For me, it was definitely the conversation. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head was the conversations with the department heads.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like the editor, the production designer, composer, distilling the vision, or distilling character and story into these other mediums, and trying to communicate that, and just, yeah, over time figuring out that I had it. It was all kind of there, and that because I was manically searching elsewhere for it, on the outside, like, oh, then maybe I can say this from this, but no, it's just sometimes just when you were simply talking about what you liked about it, boom, it was there. It was communicated very, very easily. So that was kind of nice, to know that you didn't have to look too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So obviously, our lab took place at a real crisis point, not only because of the uncertainty and fear surrounding COVID and the global pandemic, but we also began our program just as the whole country was thrust into this painful reckoning with systemic racism and the demonstrations to demand racial equity. And I think that transitioning this program online, even without that last piece, was going to be one thing. And then having that come to the forefront just as we were starting made it a whole other experience. And I'm just curious, with a little bit of distance from it now, sort of what did it mean for you to be going through the lab while all of this was happening? and how has all of it impacted how you think about, you know, what your role as an artist is or should be, or that you want it to be moving forward? Bing, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I remember, so many of the major protests started happening right around when we started the Directors Lab, and I just remember being sort of having a split sort of attention span, not only about, the projects in the lab, but just trying to keep up with what was happening. I'd never really been a Twitter user, but I remember like getting, like logging back into my Twitter and really finding that to be the most useful piece of like news getting. But yeah, I mean, it made me question like, what am I doing with my life right now? Like, is this project, like, should this be my focus? After that first week, I was sort of able to get back into the lab and, focus it more on the project. But in hindsight, I think that questioning was good. I think it's, yeah, it's like, what, how are our projects going out into the world, as it moves forward in its current state. So.
Jesus?
Well, difficult is the word that I would throw in there. Yeah, it's very interesting to be in a time where it feels like everyone is telling you that these sort of things don't matter. A pretty painting or a good story. And it kind of just felt that way for like a couple of days of like, man, yeah, it just feels like, well, this is reality, or is it? It was all such a crazy time, man, and a really human time, especially, and with great empathy, great anger, all these things, man. And I just realized that, even though we were living the history out at that moment, years from now, this becomes a memory, and memory is story. And it just always comes back to that for me. It's how I experience life. Even you asking me to remember what that stuff was becomes a story in my mind, and that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here to do, is to look at those moments, to question them, to with every page that I write, really scratch at those surfaces of history and of memory, and make them heightened, and put different masks on them and stuff. So for me, I can't say that a lot changed. I just felt locked in, and being imparted a reality that I wasn't able to see that much because of the quarantine. And man, it was just a wild time that I still don't understand now, but I'm glad that I had you guys as friends and cohorts at Sundance to over time talk to. Yeah, but at first it was difficult, but man, it evolved for me.
Thank you. Nikiatu?
Yeah, so I never lost sight of what I was constantly grappling with being present for the entire duration of the lab. And what the lab did for me was bring me back to a project that I had become estranged from, and that I probably would have been further estranged from had I not been immersed in this lab. But also with everything going on, like this is not the first time as artists we've been immersed in a pivotal time in history where we've been challenged to create. So it forced me to dig back and to seek guidance from artists before me, like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Ousmane Sembène. Like it just forced me to dig back and remember that people created through words. People focused on the art through words, and art is activism, especially for the voices that you all curated for this particular iteration of the lab. Like, we have to make these films. I think everyone's film is really poignant and timely and resonant, even with everything going on, even with the vastly different stories that we're navigating. And so while I was conflicted and I really struggled, like there were advisors where I was like, you don't even know what's going on out here. And I have to sit here and listen to your notes about a character that's not even my protagonist. Like you're fixated on the character that resonates with you the most, which is perhaps someone who is reflecting back your own privilege, and you're having issues with that. So those were some of the things I was navigating simultaneously, but all of it was affirming in very interesting ways.
Thank you. Laura.
Oof.
That pretty much encapsulates it.
I mean, that may be all I want to say. I'm thinking about it. I was in the middle of a mental health crisis when we were in the labs. I had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder once before, just post 9/11. I was evacuated from Ground Zero, and NYU. I went to NYU undergrad, and that institution completely failed me and all the students. And they, not because the humans that were part of the institution weren't good people with great intentions who only wanted to help, but they were not equipped to help because this was unprecedented and they were traumatized. And so the NYU attitude, as I would, summarize it, was we will be like, the way we can help the students is pretend like nothing is different. We're going to be strong, and that way they're going to feel secure because there's something safe, that like continues on. What it didn't acknowledge was the sort of disintegrating mental health of the students and the faculty and the administration. It's like only now that I can sort of go back and see that. So entering into the Sundance, community during this kind of crystallized for me that institutions are always going to be insufficient and community is necessary. I think that's the conclusion that I kind of came out of, because I was exhausted by continually having to advocate for my mental health in terms of how the sessions were conducted. And I was supported by individuals I was talking to that were hearing me and trying to respond, but who didn't have mental health training, and had never organized a Zoom event. Elise, you told me when we talked before the labs and I brought up some of these issues, you very honestly said, we've been running the same program for 20 years or, whatever, and now we have to invent a new one from scratch. So the challenge is a communal challenge. And I've been thinking that I'm going to be thinking incredibly deeply about the mental health of my crew as we go forward. Obviously, the physical safety is going to be necessary for all of us to think about of actual physical filmmaking, but the mental health is key, because sometimes people in the middle of a crisis can't advocate for themselves, and you have to be really aware of what's going on.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate everyone's candor. And it is a bit of an undiscovered country, I feel like we're all traversing. Well, it's been really lovely to spend time with you guys again and hear your reflections on the lab. And I guess we'll just end with a question that I will often ask of participants who've been through various programs of ours, in terms of thinking about, a big sort of takeaway from your lab experience, which is, tell me one thing that you know about yourself or your project that you know now that you didn't know before the lab began.
Oh man, I mean that was a big one for me. I had to think about it a little more.
Okay.
Yeah, could I have a moment?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Laura, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think this is, as a filmmaker and as a person, if someone's asking me to explain myself and I explain myself and they ask me again to explain myself, then we just shouldn't have a relationship. Like, I think I'm trying to apply that in all areas of my life.
Great. Mikiade?
I want to give the same answer as Jesus. I had like bullet points for every question, and this was the question where I was like, I'll wing it. By the time we get to the end, I'll figure it out. But
it doesn't have to be the
think,
only thing, just one thing.
Right. No, you know, a big thing for me has been seeing other people grapple with their own stories in similar ways that I'm grappling with mine. Like, we don't have to have all the answers now. That's really important to acknowledge as a creator, is that the answers will come, and it's important to be privy to the questions that are being asked the same way in different ways, or the same question that is being asked in different ways from different advisors and even your peers. Like, what is the nail people are hitting on? And so I was able to figure out like a big problem with my story based on honing in on what the big problem was that people were saying in different ways. But also the tenacity of everyone and the grit of everyone in getting the thing made. I needed that, because you hit a wall where you're like, does this story matter? Why have I been chipping away at this for so long? Why now, in light of everything going on? And yeah, those are the things that I pulled from both you all and the advisors in terms of coming out of this stronger and better.
Great, thank you. All right, Jesus, you're ready.
I'm good. I'm back. Nick, you have to inspire me. Thank you. Yeah, you know, I think for me, yeah, one of the big moments for me was just to know and realize that as a director, you know, maybe I don't know as much about camera or lensing, or maybe I don't know as much about the rhythm of editing and that the different kinds of software or the ins and outs, particularly of production design. But I know this story. I know the characters. I know how they live and breathe. I know the colors and the edges of it all better than anyone. And that's really all I need to step onto that set and give a direction and have a vision of it. That was something that I had hoped and was a relief to know throughout the conversations that I had through these labs.
Great, thank you. And Bing, what about you?
Yeah, you know, I think I've always been one to shy away from like the idea of lookbooks. Like you know, but I think going through this lab has really made me see that it's just sort of a necessary thing to be able to communicate this, you know, project I'm so close to, that I feel like I have in my head, to all the various collaborators I'm going to be working with. And that, you know, despite how I fear that it sort of hems me in a little bit, to have to pull from things that I don't necessarily see as 100% like what, you know, the story is. Yeah, it's just, I've really seen how other people have done it so well, you know, in terms of my fellows, and I'm going to be walking away sort of, you know, thinking about that and yeah, just having that tool, a new tool in my tool set.
Great. Well, I want to thank each of you so much for taking the time to spend with me today to have this conversation, and for being so articulate and honest. And, you know, we at Sundance just really look forward to continuing to go on this journey with each of you and doing whatever we can to make sure that, you know, you get your films out there into the world, and look forward to each of you making a few films so then you can come back to the lab as advisors. Thanks so much.